I had extreme anxiety for the better part of 2 years. It was without question the worst period of my life. And there were two reasons for that. Number one, I didn't understand what was going on with me. I was being told that it was anxiety, but the symptoms were so strange that I had a hard time believing it. Things like derealization, head fog, and intense panic attacks made me think that there was some real medical issue wrong with me. Now, the second reason that it was the worst period of my life was because I didn't know how to stop all these symptoms. I felt trapped and I felt helpless, and I feared that the rest of my life would be spent dealing with anxiety. But on this channel, I talk about how I learned that all these strange symptoms were all because of anxiety, that I didn't have any real health issue, but rather an overactive nervous system and fight or flight response. Then, when I changed how I approached my anxiety and I no longer resisted and I no longer feared it, my symptoms began gradually improving. And then I made a full recovery. One of the important parts of the recovery process is allowing anxiety in. You have to allow your anxiety in if you're going to get better. What this means is you have to stop resisting and fighting against your anxiety when it shows up. You cannot go to battle with your anxiety and expect to win. Instead, you have to allow anxiety in and you have to allow it to do whatever it wants. So today, I'm going to tell you about the first time that I allowed my anxiety in and how it went. Let's begin. Hey friend, welcome back to Fearless Anxiety. I'm your host, Peter Wessels. Now, I have a gift for you joining me here today. I've put the entire framework for the recovery process in the link below. It's called the 5-Step Cure to Anxiety and Panic Attacks, and it's the entire framework for how I recovered from anxiety. It's completely free, so make sure you click the link below to download it. All right, so my anxiety began with a string of panic attacks, but as I mentioned earlier, I then developed all sorts of strange and bizarre symptoms. These were scary symptoms and they felt dangerous. So I did what all anxiety sufferers do. I fought and I resisted against these symptoms. I was scared of these symptoms. So I thought that I needed to defend myself. So when I feel a wave of anxiety, a panic attack, or any other symptom coming on, I'd try to fight it off. I'd tense up and I'd resist against it. And to be honest, sometimes in the beginning, that would work. Sometimes I could fight against my anxiety and it would go away. But here's the thing. Even when I could get the anxiety to go away, it would just come back even stronger the next time. And as the weeks and months wore on, my anxiety just got worse and worse. I found myself progressively being able to do less and less, and I was turning into a shell of my former self. I was declining social events, avoiding my friends. I stopped exercising, and I soon barely was leaving my house. My entire focus turned simply to trying to survive each and every day, as anxiety was just endlessly torturing me. So no, I wasn't living, I wasn't having new experiences, and I wasn't enjoying my life. I was simply just existing. And believe me, that is no way to live. All right, so then about 2 years in, I had a turning point. This turning point came after I found the book called Hope and Help for Your Nerves by Dr. Claire Weekes. This book was written back in the 1950s, and it proposed an entirely new approach to anxiety. It talks about how we instinctively resist and defend ourselves against anxiety. We tense up and we fight it. But it also explained how that keeps us trapped with anxiety, that perpetuates our anxiety. So instead, we have to do the opposite. We have to allow anxiety in, and we have to accept that it's there and let it be present. Now, when I read this in the book, I was like, wow, I have never heard anything like that. In fact, all I'd heard up to that point was recommendations for different supplements or medications to take, or even different coping mechanisms that I could implement when I was feeling anxious. This recommendation by Dr. Claire Weekes was completely different though. And I immediately knew that I was onto something. The reason that I felt that way is because it outlined everything that I was doing wrong. I was resisting and I was fighting against anxiety. And most of all, I was fearful of my anxiety. I was terrified of how anxiety made me feel. So all that together was a recipe for prolonged and severe anxiety, and I suddenly understood that after reading that book. As I finished that book, I was sitting there thinking, okay, what if I did the opposite? What if I, instead of resisting and fighting against my anxiety, I did the opposite by accepting anxiety and allowing it in? And as I was sitting there, I decided, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to allow my anxiety in. But just a few minutes later, my mind started to fill up with doubt, and I was worried. I was scared that if I started accepting anxiety and allowing it in, that my anxiety might get worse and that I'd fall even farther into the dark depths of anxiety. So as I laid in bed that night, I went to the Amazon page for Hope and Help for Your Nerves, and I started reading a bunch of reviews and testimonials on how accepting anxiety had helped them with their anxiety symptoms. And I was trying to gain confidence that, okay, I was on the right path and that this had worked for others and it could work for me. So when I woke up the next morning, I'd developed enough courage, and I started to nervously start accepting my anxiety. And I'll admit, I wasn't very good in the beginning. And I think that's true for most anxiety sufferers. We've been resisting anxiety for so long, and trying to change that instinct is really challenging in the beginning. Not only that, but like me, most anxiety sufferers are scared to let anxiety in because we're fearful that if we allow anxiety in and we drop our guard, that our anxiety will become even worse, that our symptoms will become even more pronounced. All right, so what happened after I did? I gained the courage, right? And I accepted my anxiety. Nothing happened. Yes, nothing happened when I started accepting my anxiety. My anxiety was still there, and it was just as intense. Yes, I know that's very anticlimactic, and you were probably hoping to hear something different, but it's also what I expected to have happen, because I knew that starting to accept my anxiety wasn't some magic pill that was going to immediately reduce my anxiety. I knew that I shouldn't expect sudden results. And because I knew that, it gave me the confidence that I needed to just keep doing it. I did, however, change my process of how I was accepting anxiety, because I found trying to accept anxiety was kind of challenging for me. So I did, however, quickly change my process of how I was accepting anxiety. Dr. Claire Weeks, she talked about accepting anxiety and allowing it in. But what I found practically was accepting anxiety. If I told myself just to accept anxiety, it was really hard to flip that switch in my brain. And what I've done with clients and what I've found with other anxiety sufferers is that the same is true for them. Accepting anxiety is quite challenging. So what I did was I changed the word accepting to surrendering. I pivoted and said, no, I'm not going to accept anxiety. I am going to surrender to it. And so I began surrendering to my anxiety. I was laying down my weapons. I was stopping all the resistance and all the fighting and just allowing anxiety in with curiosity instead of fear. So each time anxiety showed up, I repeated to myself, I surrender to my anxiety. I surrender to my anxiety. Now, what this did was it instructed my mind to resist the urge and the instinct to fight against anxiety. And as I continued to practice this approach, I became better and better at it. So when you start, just know you're not going to be good at it. It is going to be a fake it until you make it approach, because surrendering changes every instinct that you have in your body. Resisting and fighting against your anxiety is what is embedded inside of you through repetition of months or years of battling with anxiety. Now, surrendering becomes far easier and far more natural the more you practice it. And the same was true for me. So about 4 weeks into surrendering to my anxiety, which is about 4 weeks after I read the book Hope and Help for Your Nerves, I began to see changes in my anxiety. My anxiety felt less intense and it felt less scary. In fact, some of the symptoms, like my derealization, had disappeared completely. From there, my anxiety continued to get better and better, and soon I didn't have any fear of it at all. You kind of get to this point where your anxiety shows up and you just don't care. You can feel the sensations, but they don't bother you. They don't hold any power over you, and that's a monumental step. Then gradually, of course, the symptoms completely go away and you never experience any of these bizarre symptoms again. Now, to be fair, I'm zeroing in on one aspect of the recovery process. This step, surrendering to your anxiety. But there's of course a lot more to it than that. And that's why I've put the complete approach in the link below for you to download. Now, one more item that I want to touch on is that there is going to be ongoing doubt as a part of the recovery process. Doubt is going to be present for a good part of your recovery. First, you will doubt that surrendering to your anxiety and the fearless approach that I teach will not work for you. You will question its simplicity and think that your anxiety is far too complex for such a simple approach to lead to your recovery. But don't worry, these are the same doubts that all anxieties have, including myself. You have to silence this doubt and you have to persevere through it. Doubt is the biggest ally of anxiety. It is what can throw you off the recovery path and keep your anxiety alive. But you're not going to allow that to happen. You will hear the doubt, but you will ignore it and keep practicing this approach. And I promise you that you are going to see results and you're going to see them very soon. All right, don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button on the way out. I really appreciate you watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.